Hello everyone and welcome to game 3 of yesterday's match in the Chessable Masters final. We still have the grand final, so this is only the final. Magnus Carlsen versus Hikaru Nakamura, and it's an amazing game, features some amazing tactics and a really wild opening by Hikaru as he chooses the Cozio defense to Magnus's Ruy Lopez, which is not something you want to play against the highest rated player in the world unless you really know what you're doing. Obviously Hikaru knows what he's doing. Now let's see what Magnus has to say about that. So let's check it out. Magnus already won game 1. Game 2, where Hikaru had the white pieces, ended in a draw. So should Magnus win this, he wins the final. Let's see what happened. We have pawn to e4 by Magnus, pawn to e5 by Hikaru, knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. Going for the Ruy Lopez. Sorry about that. We have knight g to e7. This is the Cozio defense, obviously you are saying that this is never a problem because now the knight can recapture and your pawns will not be ruined. Plus the knight is coming to g6 where it will add additional support to e5. So how can you counter this? We have knight to c3 by Magnus, knight to g6, and pawn to d4. We have e captures, knight captures, and just knight captures on d4. Queen captures on d4 and pawn to c6. So this is the main line of how black defends when playing the Cozio defense, with bishop back to e2 and queen to b6, offering a queen trade, which Magnus declines by playing queen to d3. Again, this is the top move in the position, bishop to e7, pawn to a4, and now there are a couple of games where castles was played. Hikaru opts for pawn to a5, and it is now as of move 10 that we have a completely new game. Okay, both players castle, we have castles, bishop to e3 attacking the queen, and it seems like you can capture on b2, but it only seems that way, because if queen captures, rook b1 will trap the black queen. So after bishop to e3, Hikaru blocks the bishop to c3, bishop to c5. It'd be great if you had knight to a4, but there is a pawn there. However, you should always check. Bishop captures, queen captures, and now rook a comes to d1. And Magnus is saying that he might be interested in a queen trade with something like maybe queen to d4 or queen to d6. One thing that Magnus made sure of is that Hikaru cannot play pawn to d6 or pawn to d5. Hikaru really wanted to play this on the next move, but Magnus has full control over the d5 square, and also by playing rook d1, the queen and the rook are covering d6, so you cannot free your light square bishop that easy. So what can Hikaru do? He goes knight e5, attacks the queen, and queen to d6. Obviously, if Magnus played something like queen to g3, Hikaru would play d6 instantly. So, okay, queen captures, we have rook captures, and now Hikaru plays pawn to f6. His plan is to play knight f7, kick away the rook, and then somehow open up this d-pawn. But Magnus says nope, pawn to f4, knight f7, and just bishop to c4. He pins the knight, and king to h8, unpinning. And now you'd probably expect, let's just capture the knight here, as now the knight is no longer pinned, it's threatening our rook on d6. But no, Magnus just goes back, rook to d6, because remember, the point is to keep the strong bishop and also to prevent the pawn from going forward. And you still can't go forward. If you go d6, we're just going to capture the knight and then eliminate this pawn on d6. So, okay, b6 by Hikaru. Maybe he can somehow get that bishop to a6 in, even though, okay, the d7 pawn would be weakened, but the bishop on c4 is undefended. So maybe somehow you can get it done, but no, we have pawn to e5 by Magnus. Okay, now the problem is, if you trade here, how are you dealing with this? The knight is hanging, you cannot move the knight, you cannot add another defender. You could play king here, but then the other rook comes into the attack, and you can just resign here. So Hikaru goes knight to h6, and Magnus goes knight to e4. Now the knight, once that knight hits d6, this is as good as over. We have knight to f5, stopping that, and rook to d3. We have pawn to d5. Hikaru could maybe try playing around this a little bit, but he's never developing this pawn, and if he doesn't do that, he's not developing his bishop, and he's not connecting his rook. So he decides to give up a pawn. Only way to do it, e captures on d6, Magnus captures en passant, and now bishop to d7. And it's a very sad position to be in, but that is, I believe, the fate of everyone who tries the Cozio defense against Magnus Carlsen. We have rook to e1 and rook a to e8. We have king to f2 and now pawn to g5. And here, we get another glimpse into the reality that Magnus is not some sort of a cyborg sent from the future, that he is human, as he plays rook to b3, which is a very nice move, attacking the b6 pawn. And remember, this is a 10+0 game, it's a rapid game, but with 0 seconds increment. So if you go down on time, you're probably going to lose. But just for fun, I will show you a line. Or rather, I'm not going to show you a line. You tell me what can white play here to end the game basically on the spot. While I give you a couple of seconds. So the move that ends the game on the spot, believe it or not, is pawn to g4. Point being that the knight really doesn't have any good squares, and it doesn't matter if you go to g7 or h6 or wherever. White's next moves are pretty much the same. h3, leaving black without any good options, and the knight captures on f6 is coming. Pretty much whatever you play. Let's say g captures, knight captures on f6, and now look at this. Rook captures on f6. It seems like white lost his mind, but after rook captures and bishop captures, there is pawn to d7. You will win the pawn back, and after the piece back, and after captures. Yes, the material is equal, but the knight is trapped. There's nothing you can do. You cannot go here, cannot go here, cannot go to f7, and of course if you go to g8, then we're just gonna lock it down. And while you can defend it, white will happily trade everything down, just pick up the f4 pawn and then win the extra pawn endgame. So it's that simple. But okay, you know, players have to be mindful of the time as well. Rook to b3, and now Hikaru will not miss his chance to get back into the game. G captures on f4, rook captures on b6, and knight to e3. We have bishop to d3, defending the c2 pawn, knight to g4 check, we have king f3, and pawn to f5 now. We have knight to c5, attacking the bishop, and Hikaru goes for it. Rook captures on a1, knight captures on d7, attacking the rook, rook d8, and now rook to b8. Magnus will be down the exchange, but he will have a very, very dangerous pass pawn. Also, here, another very cool move would have been rook b7. There's no way to defend this position, because imagine, well, what can you do? Bishop captures and f5 is coming next. Let's say you defend that. Knight h6, you defend the pawn, knight f6, and there's no stopping checkmate. It is as simple as that. So, you know, a nice miss by Magnus. Rook to b8 was played, and now we have rook e back to e8 by Hikaru. Rook captures, and now bishop captures on f5, again making it very, very difficult for Hikaru to defend against this pass pawn. But Hikaru is resilient and resourceful. He plays knight h6, king captures on f4, and now knight to f7. An interesting maneuver here would have been, for example, captures, and then after rook captures on d7, it seems like, again, what is Magnus doing? You're down a full rook, but after king e6, it is again white who is winning this. For example, you're going to go to d8, d7, let's say king g7, you attack the rook moves, and you just win that. Rook captures, and this is now again winning for white. White is up 2 pawns, and it's a very, very straightforward win. So after king captures on f4, knight to f7 by Hikaru, again the only way to defend. Knight to e5, offering a trade to have the d6 pawn defended, or trading pawns. Basically, you cannot capture with the rook, the knight is hanging, so you have to capture with the knight. The knight again controls f7. You know, remember the famous meme, you know, I fork the king, the rook, and the knight. Don't do that. So knight captures on c6, and now rook to f8. We have knight back to d4, and king to g8. So this is now the position. Magnus up 3 pawns, but Hikaru up the exchange. We have pawn to b3, and king to f7. Here, Hikaru should play something like pawn to h5, or even just trade on f5 and then get the king into the game, and try to bully the knight with the rook. Again, it is white who is pushing this for the win, but you know, it's not easy playing against the rook. But Hikaru played king f7, thinking that if Magnus captures, he's going to play rook h8 and then just gobble up the kingside pawns, but that is not the case. Magnus does capture on h7, but now look at this. Rook to h8 and king to e5, offering a trade. Knight to b7, avoiding it, and now bishop to e4, attacking the knight, again stopping rook captures on h2. So rook e8 check, we have king to f4, and now knight to c5 with a double attack on the bishop, and just bishop to f3 keeping all of the pawns alive. We have rook to d8, attacking the knight, king to e3, rook to e8 with check, king to d2, rook to d8, again attacking the knight, king to c3, and the rook to c8, threatening nasty discoveries. We have knight to c6, and now king to f6. We have king to c4, knight to b7, knight to b7, and king to b5. We have rook to g8, well, making some moves, waiting to see what Magnus does, and Magnus plays knight captures on a5. He sort of blunders the knight, but not really, because the 5 pawns will be stronger than the rook. We have rook to g5 with check, king to b6, and now knight captures on a5. And look at the position. Basically, it's one piece each, and Magnus has 5 pawns for the rook. But not only that, he also has the knight trap. Look at all of the squares the knight can use to escape. With the bishop on f3 covering c6 and b7, this knight can never escape. And it's only a matter of this bishop, for example, blocking the knight with the bishop to b5, the rook no longer guards the knight, and then you gobble up the knight. And then you have a bishop and 5 pawns for the rook. So this is as good as over. Pawn to g4 was played, we have rook to e5, and now pawn to h4. King g7, bishop to g2, preparing bishop to f1 and bishop to f5, king to f6, and now bishop to f1. Hikaru played knight captures on b3, and that's pretty much it. As a bishop to b5 is coming, so he might as well, grab something. C captures rook to e4, and he was in this position on move 57 that Hikaru Nakamura resigned the game, and with it the match. Magnus wins the Chessable Masters final, and we will see. He gets some rest, and he will see who he faces in the grand final. And of course, you resign this because now the pawns will start marching forward. For example, pawn to a5. You can capture all of the kingside pawns. It doesn't matter, because once that pawn reaches a7, you will put the rook and the bishop on this diagonal. And that is it. Next move you promote, you will have to give up the rook, and then the passed b pawn wins the game, as it most often does. So yeah, that's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely done by Magnus, showing us how to tackle the Cozio defense, because you might be well versed in some of the main lines, but from time to time people will hit you with the Cozio defense, and then you have to know what to expect. Of course, Magnus does this even though he prefers scrambled pieces on the board, but he also knows his theory. So there you have it. That's how we play against it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Andreas Rosenthal, Andrew Steinl, Yuri Ralchenko, David Arai, and David Gasparian for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.